if you're born now, there's a less than 50-50 chance you're gonna do better than your parents, and it's driving people crazy.
I admit that one thing I do struggle with a little bit is the universal basic income concept. So it really is the shadowy backroom situation that sounds like a conspiracy, but it is real.
Certainly the political realm, by the way, is more guilty of conformity and careerism than most of these domains. I did not foresee ChatGPT 4 becoming as broadly applicable as it actually has.
Today on the podcast, I'm thrilled to have my friend Andrew Yang here, who's a former 2020 presidential candidate and now the leader of the Forward Party. And we talk everything from AI to universal basic income and the potentials of the 2024 election. Andrew Yang, thank you so much for being here.
Rikki, congratulations on the show.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be one of the first guests, and whatever I say, it didn't happen according to the name of the show.
Awesome. So I'm so happy that you're here because I just got back from this Silicon Valley summit where I was a speaker. We were under Chatham House rules, so I can't say who says what. But I found that being in a closed circle of people who are in the AI space and are kind of unfettered in what they're talking about, it was just complete techno-optimism to the point that it really frightened me, and it made me think of you because you were literally writing books about AI before I even knew what AI was. Like, what was it, 2017, 2018?
Yeah, my book came out in 2018, and I occasionally leaf through it and think, do I need to update this? And I actually think it holds up pretty well still.
Incredibly. Like, you're the political Paul Revere of our country. You are sounding the alarm bells before anyone even knows what you're talking about. Like, I think about the fact that in the 2020 election cycle, this was like your leading issue.
My leading issue, yeah.
So where do you feel like it has grown to your expectations with AI? Is it exactly as you predicted it? I know that you thought that truckers were going to be among
threatened
the
earlier,
first,
yeah.
But it seems now that it's like the knowledge economy jobs. How has that aged?
Yeah, I did not foresee ChatGPT 4 becoming as broadly applicable as it actually has. I put in my book that, look, there are a lot of repetitive white-collar jobs that will be threatened at some point, that you might be more likely to get displaced if you're an accountant or a travel agent or something like that than if you're a manual worker. But I was surprised by the pace and the adoption. And even now, it's been wild because I talk to folks who are in the bells of companies, and some of them are 100% already making use of these tools to hire fewer people. And then you look at the economic statistics, and it's like nothing to see here. And I think that my predictions were, if anything, off in terms of the time scale, that I thought it would happen in 10 to 15 years, and instead it happened in more like 4 or 5.
Yeah. And how do you feel? I've heard you talk in the past about how the 2016 election might have been impacted by the automation of jobs. How do you feel the political impact is going to be going into 2024 and beyond?
No, I think one poll I saw said something like 80% plus of Americans want government to do more on AI. And we're probably not going to do enough to satisfy the American public. If there are thinkers that I tend to want to listen to on the approaches we should take, it's Tristan Harris at the Center for Humane Technology, Gary Marcus, who is a very, in my mind, positively inclined human technologist who actually can translate, a lot of what people are actually doing to the real world. And most Americans right now are looking at this administration, and this administration has done some of the things they can do in terms of saying, hey, federal agencies, we should do this, here's a framework, but no one would look at it and say that they've taken a heavy hand towards the AI companies. And this is just one of the examples, I think, of Americans looking up and saying, okay, are we really addressing these concerns? And you and I know Jonathan Haidt, who you'll have on the show, I'm sure, later this year. And he's been pounding the pavement with his new book, The Anxious Generation, and everyone's eating it up thankfully, rightfully,
Yeah.
because he's right. But it's an emblem of how out to lunch our government has been, where you have social media depressing the heck out of young people, particularly girls, unfortunately, and then it takes an author and social psychologist to raise his hand and be like, guys, this is nuts.
Yeah.
So I think our approach or a limited approach to AI is going to be one of the things that stokes American discontent with the way things are right now.
And if you were in a position of power right now, what would the kind of low-hanging fruit of regulating AI be?
Wow, I would be. Look, I know some of these people, but I would be bringing them to the table and saying, "Look, guys, like I know we have to compete, we have to be fast, but we also need to be mindful of the public interest and the public good." And talking to Tristan, he said something that's really, really to me indicative, where he said to various companies and technologists, would you agree that if the AI ends up going down a negative direction, we should be able to pull the plug and recalibrate and figure out what to do? And then they say, oh, yeah, we should be able to do that. And then Tristan says, okay, then show me your protocol as to who can make a decision and how they would pull the plug. And none of these organizations actually have have any of that. It's like, well, shoot. I mean, in theory, I guess that might be a thing to do, but practically, they have no means to do so. And so that's like a great example of something that if you were at the table with them, be like, look, we're going to have to compete, but show me the human being and the process through which, if something goes haywire, you can actually pull the plug, and that would be table stakes, and the sense is that actually is not happening in the real world.
And what are the jobs or the career lines that you think are the most immediately under threat right now?
The painful thing, Rikki, is that a lot of the stuff that folks considered most human, I think are going to be among the first to go, particularly in arts and creativity. I mean, if you look at what these tools can do with visuals, soon with film, photos. I mean, if you look at what images can be produced on command, the human eye actually can't even distinguish between them and real people. And you can try this right now.
You can do your LinkedIn headshots for virtually free with AI rather than hiring a photographer now. You can get your professional portrait taken effectively.
Yeah, no excuse not to look good out there. No, but it's a lot of the most creative and artistic endeavors that people would think would be the most insulated, I think are among the most threatened. And I was out in Hollywood last week, and this is kind of a related thing, but one of my friends in Hollywood said the thing people are saying is survive until 25 because there's something of a nuclear winter going on there. And it's not purely because of AI. There are a bunch of trends that have come together in terms of money leaving Hollywood and not as many projects being made. You and I were with an actor, Dane DeHaan, last month, and he said the same thing. It's like, hey, I love you all, but I'd rather not be here. I'd rather be, on a set somewhere, but we're not making as much. So I think a lot of the creative fields are going to get decimated. And then at scale, it's the repetitive white collar work. The example I always try and call attention to is call center workers, where there are still about 2 million Americans who work at call centers, and they're working on AI that's going to replace that ASAP. And if you think about those roles, they're very, very automatable. I mean, what's interesting is that when I call a call center now, the person will actually say, hi, this is Adrian from Lubbock, Texas, because they're trying to, frankly, demonstrate the value of having a human in the call center. And for sure, there are Americans who'd, we used to get a little bit irritated when the person was in India. You'd call, and the person was clearly in India, and you'd be like, oh, and so then American companies said, you know what, we're going to bring some of that domestically, and then we're going to try and take credit for it in various ways. But a lot of that stuff's going to get replaced pretty quickly.
And in terms of your solutions, I admit that one thing I do struggle with a little bit is the universal basic income concept. Just kind of some of my more conservative sensibilities kind of shrivel up when I hear that. But tell me how that is a solution in your mind to at least helping us move towards a future where AI is more prevalent.
Yeah, I'm convinced. I'm going to get very, very wonky. Let's see if this works on you, Rikki. But first, let me say that I'm for an enhanced child tax credit that gets money to poor families. I'm for negative income tax that chews people up to a certain point. I'm for anything that helps get more flexibility and buying power into people's hands that really need it. And I think that poverty is driving a lot of the issues. I was talking to you before we started filming about Scott Galloway's TED Talk about how we're shafting young people in particular. And one of the threshold issues is something like housing affordability, where if you're a young person, you can't buy a house. Healthcare is obviously going up in price. Education's more and more expensive. And so we keep on moving all these things that used to be staples of a middle class life up in price, and then saying, hey, here you are. If you're struggling, if you're born now, there's a less than 50-50 chance you're going to do better than your parents, and it's driving people crazy. And so things that we can do to get buying power into the hands of the people that are not doing well, I'm for. I think a universal basic income is inevitable in a time when we're talking about AI in real life that's going to decimate, in my opinion, millions of jobs. But one of the vision I'm going to paint, and this is one of the first times I'm doing this in this kind of setting, but I'm very excited about it. I hope you're open to it. All right, so check it out. Let's say I have technology that can do the work of millions of Americans, which in my opinion is either here or will be here very, 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 very soon. And to level set, only about a third of Americans graduate from four-year universities. It's about 35%. So you have a workforce that's 2/3 essentially high school workers. And the top 5 job categories in the economy are clerical and administrative, retail, food service, food prep, truck driving, transportation, and manufacturing. About half of all American jobs, and some of those are going to get automated away. And so you have this technology that, by the way, is just going to increase in power all the time. And you're young. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
So you're getting better. I am at a point where if I don't get worse in a given week, it's a good week. And then there are Americans who feel that. We're not getting better the way this technology is getting better. And so what's going to happen is that more and more of us are going to lose the race against AI and various technologies if your measuring stick is getting work done as cost effectively as possible. I was a corporate attorney for 5 months, and technology can already do the work that I was doing much, much more accurately and quickly and cost effectively, because I was billing for like a 20-something-year-old kid. I was getting paid some ridiculous rate. And now, by the way, I have a friend who's actually running a tech company, Legalimation, that is doing that legal work with AI. So you have AI that's going to steamroll through the economy in various ways. You're going to have more and more people pushed into distress. Now, even for the UBI guy saying, look, getting money into people's hands, I think that's a necessary step. But if you try and address how we're going to be happy and prosperous and fulfilled during this time, in my view, we need to create more and more paths and frameworks for us to be able to do things that we enjoy and that humans value, that the market economy will not value appropriately. And the example I used on the presidential trail was my wife is at home with one of our boys who's autistic. What does the market value that at? And the answer is 0. And most people think, okay, I get that that's invaluable, it's immensely valuable that she's doing that, but the market's not going to all of a sudden rush out and reward her. And so that's caretakers, that's obviously parents in various ways, but it's also tutors, coaches, in many cases, artists, musicians, creatives, et cetera. The market's not going to be looking to reward these people. It's one reason why if you are a young person saying, hey, I want to be a poet or something, your parents freak out. Whereas, so if you can imagine an economy that is built around arts and creativity, which in my view we're going to need, and then you could have something around nurturing and education, and then you could have something around health and fitness. I mean, right now we're spending 17% of our economy on a healthcare system that is really designed to suck money out of us after we get sick, and we all can sense, by the way, the food system's involved with that too, that imagine if some of that value was getting translated to make us stronger and healthier, so that if I went to the gym or was doing something that keeps me healthy. And that is a funny thing. Like right now, I pay for my gym. Like if I get a trainer, I pay for my trainer. I mean, the fact is, you know, if you were to bring in the positive impact of my being healthier, you should probably be paying me. You know, it should probably. If you can imagine someone whose job it is to like make people around them healthier and stronger, and then have an economy or even a currency. So if you imagine like an arts and creativity currency, nurturing education currency, and then a health and fitness currency, and then you build different paths to human flourishing with different economic axes. So right now we have a two-dimensional economy-ish. You have money, and then you have time. And so what I believe we need to move towards is a multi-dimensional economy where you have different pursuits of different human value, and then people who are able to live and make a living within each of these economies, and each of them has their own currency.
And how immediate is that future that you envision? Because I imagine if you were to implement UBI today, like the market would react. I mean, if I'm a landlord, I would charge everyone more if I knew that everyone had an extra $1,000 a month. So what would the on-ramp look like to a future where you actually had an economy that operated that way?
Well, so this is my life's work, honestly, is that like I think we need to try and pave the way for like a more human-centered economy as quickly as we can. And these things aren't mutually exclusive. You could be investing in arts and creativity or a nurturing education pillar or an economy independent of some kind of universal foundation or floor. I think that we should be taking shots at all these approaches, but time is running out. I mean, one of the quotes I use is futurist named Buckminster Fuller said that the race between utopia and dystopia will be neck and neck until the last second. And right now, I do believe we're trending very, very strongly towards dystopia. I mean, when you were at Silicon Valley, you probably got a whiff of that, where you're like,
Yep.
like this may not end up working out ideally. And so what are the forces that are driving us towards something approaching utopia or human flourishing and fulfillment? I mean, the US is the richest, theoretically, richest, most advanced society in the history of the world, and we have record highs of anxiety and depression and lack of affordability and people pissed off and frustrated. I mean, it's really not utopian. Like substance abuse, drug addiction, the rest of it is taking off. And there are like a multitude of reasons for this. But I think one reason is that people don't feel like they have a path forward.
And I saw this interesting stat recently that it was something like 8 million men in prime working age are not in the labor force at all, and just not participating. They don't count towards the unemployment rate because they're not searching for a job. Do you feel that kind of trend of people living in the shadows and backing away from the real world and professional fulfillment is in part being fueled by technology?
Oh yeah, and it is gendered in its way, and I mean, this will be like a fun opportunity to talk about it. All right, so the argument I made, which I still believe very, very strongly, is that that we automated away 4 million manufacturing jobs from approximately, let's call it the 90s to like 2016, and it turns out that, let's call it 2/3 of those manufacturing jobs or more were held by men. And if you think about manufacturing workers, it was a lot of non-college educated men in Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. You decimated those those jobs, and then those men went home and drank themselves to death and got depressed. And by the way, I looked at the stats on this. Like, there was not mass retraining. There was not, let me turn over like for a second career. Like, that was not happening. It was a lot of fairly negative outcomes. And so that ended up having different effects on the family, where you had marriage rates go down pretty much in lockstep with the decimation of those manufacturing jobs. All of a sudden, people got married less, and they sometimes still had kids. And as we're sitting here, 41% of American kids are born outside of a married couple. And the outcomes are such that if you have single mom, because like 90% of single parents are single moms. So if you have a little girl raised by a single mom, the outcomes are okay. You have super mom. Turns out girls are more resilient and adaptable when they're young. If you have a little boy raised by a single mom, it turns out little boys are more sensitive to parental time input than little girls are. They also are sensitive to having a male role model or not. And I feel terrible even expressing this, because we all know single moms are superheroes, but there are limitations to what you can do if you're a single mom and there's a little boy who's looking around. And by the way, the little boy also internalizes the sense that, like, I guess, well, my dad's not here, and like, I guess guys are kind of losers. Maybe I'm a loser too. And so you wind up with behavioral and academic problems at higher levels among boys than girls. And it's one of the reasons why the ratio of college students now is just about 60-40 women. And so then as you translate this into adulthood, when you talk about these 8 million men who are out of the working force at prime working age, they're out there and saying, okay, like, what am I going to do if you don't have great economic prospects, and let's say you don't have a college degree, like, what are your prospects? And you don't have the economic security to feel confident about proposing, getting married, having kids. And so none of that stuff is happening at the same level. And so that there is like a very disparate impact based upon whether you're male or female. And even the time use studies show that if you have an unemployed cohort, the men tend to play video games more, gamble more, drink more, do things that frankly aren't that great. And then women do not have those problems at the same level at all. Like, women are more likely to volunteer, go back to school. So you wind up with these different paths, and it's driving a lot of our dysfunctional politics. I wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post a couple of years ago that's just called "The Boys Are Not All Right," and just went through a bunch of stats. And I'm so glad that there are folks, one person you should have on is Richard Reeves.
Richard Reeves is awesome.
Yeah, I love him. So thank goodness that people are wising up to the fact that, you know what, there are very real struggles among boys and men that end up affecting everybody. And this is not like a zero sum, like trying to hold women back thing. It's like, women should be able to succeed, men should be able to succeed, we should care about everyone, and they help each other. Like, if you have a bunch of knucklehead dudes, it's not good for women. That's not like
That's true.
It's not like a societal win. I mean, it's also not a social win or a political win.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an interesting conversation, because I think that there's just this natural allergy to talk about men's rights. And I mean, I feel like in my lifetime, it's been very girl power. I've could not be any happier to be a woman living in this time and place versus anywhere else in the scheme of human history. But there seems to be this sense that it is a zero-sum game, that if you talk about men's issues, if you bring that up, then you're a culture warrior or you're being like Andrew Tate. But I think that leaving that void in the cultural conversation is where someone like an Andrew Tate comes up and takes this kind of rogue male energy and siphons it into a negative place.
Yeah, I think that's one outcome. I think it's a result of the fact that we have this two-sided system, and so you think like, oh, if you're pro this, you're anti that, and to be, pro women and girls somehow progressive, and so if you're this other thing, then you're somehow being really conservative or someone who wants to keep things the way they are or whatnot. And so I'm really grateful to folks like Scott Galloway, Richard Reeves, Jonathan Haidt, it's like positive people that are like, look, guys, like, these are problems. And you don't, and it's a little uncomfortable because you know that there are folks who are making a more, let's say, like, angry, negative case for it. That you're like, look, I'm not over there.
Yeah.
like, I'm not some misogynist. Like, I'm not someone who wants to, somehow reverse the clock. I just want to see things as they are and say, like, wow, like this isn't going well for a lot of people.
Well, speaking of false binaries and duopolies, I'd love to talk to you about how you're feeling in 2024. I've checked in with you a few times along the way and was with you with Dean Phillips and behind that campaign. And I'd love to hear, first, I guess, a postmortem of why the no labels attempt, the Dean Phillips attempt, wasn't able to get the traction that you wanted.
Yeah, the Dean Phillips campaign was a lot of fun behind the scenes in the sense that I was up in New Hampshire campaigning when he got 19% after only being there for 6 weeks. And some awesome people got behind Dean. I thought that there should be a robust competitive primary over there and that they failed us by not having it. It was very evident that a lot of Americans were uncomfortable with just having Joe Biden get coronated. And so when Dean stepped up to run against him, I was glad to back Dean. And it could have gone, in my opinion, very, very far if some resources had come in faster and we'd had more time. I'll give you an example of something that I don't think anyone's ever seen or heard. We ran focus groups and polling groups in Michigan. And it had Dean at over 50%.
Wow.
If people actually knew who he was, what he was about, and said like him versus Biden, just Democratic primary voters, it was something like 52% Dean. Now, the fact is, it would have cost about, let's call it 15 to 20 million, and taken some time, let's call it a couple months, to translate what that focus group got to the electorate in Michigan, which is a fairly big state, and that money, was never raised and applied. But we knew that he had a real path if the resources were there and the message got out. The 19% in New Hampshire, by the way, would have been twice that if all of the independents of New Hampshire hadn't piled into the Trump versus Haley primary, because that was the same day. And so if you're an independent in New Hampshire, you had a choice. You were like, hey, am I going to try and vote for Nikki Haley against Trump? And you can look at the numbers and see that. And so like that's where all the independents went in New Hampshire. If the independents showed up to the Dean Phillips Biden primary, then Dean probably gets 40 or 50%. So and anyone who looks at those, there were professional operatives and politicos and journalists who looked at that and were like, oh yeah, like that totally would have happened. So there was an opportunity, but time just like ticked away, and the money didn't materialize, and so the time ran out. So that's what happened on the Dean Phillips campaign.
And why, obviously name recognition was an enormous challenge. Why, is it just street cowardice that someone with greater name recognition would not primary Biden?
Yeah, no, I publicly said, look, Gavin Newsome, Gretchen Whitmer, J.B. Pritzker, all should be running right now. And the fact that they're not is careerism over country. And it pains me, and I think they're missing their moment. I think they're thinking, I'll wait till 28. Because, by the way, that's what the party told them, was like, if you run this time, we will shiv you, but we will help clear the way for you in 28. And the country needed you now, not in 28. And in 28, Westmore and Josh Shapiro will run. So you missed your moment. Congratulations, Gavin Newsome, J.B. Pritzker, and Gretchen Whitmer. You were what you thought were good soldiers when the country didn't need a good soldier. The country needed a leader. But you have to look at what the internal dynamics of the Democratic Party is that you have a party that's really completely 100% beholden to the president, where the chair of it is appointed by the president. And so it's like it's their org.
Yeah.
And so, and the really senior people in the party knew that. knew that what they were doing was like a rebellion if they decided to run against Joe. And that's one reason why I give such credit to Dean Phillips. And you see the treatment that Dean Phillips got. I mean, he got lambasted by folks within his own party in a way that I thought was deeply perverse, honestly. Because like you knew this guy, you sat next to him for like, and he actually showed guts and patriotism, and then you act like he's some negative character, and it was really the opposite.
When you say that someone like Gavin Newsome has effectively been given this message by the Democratic Party that you can't run against Biden, you can't primary Biden, like that sounds like a shadowy backroom sort of situation. Like who is the Democratic Party when you say that that's the message that's come down from top?
Oh, it would be someone who's advising the president very closely. It would be the DNC chair. It would be folks like that sending a message, and often having them in a room and just like having the conversation. Very, very early on in their campaign, they had a convening, and some of the people that were at that convening, were given this message.
Yeah.
Honestly, so it's. So
it really is
deeply,
the shadowy backroom situation that sounds like a conspiracy, but it is real.
Well, you know what? The way I'd characterize it, Rikki, is it's groupthink and the way organizations go. I mean, when you look at any of these organizations, you have some whistleblower type, and then everyone freaking, frankly, they don't rally around the whistleblower.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel terrible. They're like whistleblowers who did the right thing, and then their careers are still ruined. So like that's what's happening, and certainly the political realm, by the way, is more guilty of conformity and careerism than most of these domains. And these circles are very, very tight and insular. Like you think, oh, the Democratic Party's massive. It's not. It's like this clutch of, officially it'd be like, let's call it 1,000 or 2,000, but then unofficially it's more like a few dozen folks. And the pressure is enormous. Like a lot of folks, felt the pressure and then just said, okay, I get it. Like I'll stay out of the way. And it does pain me because I think Trump would make a terrible, terrible president, like really catastrophically bad. So bad that a lot of things that you don't know are on the table all of a sudden will be on the table. He will accelerate the institutional degradation of America in a way that is going to make us all kind of pine for these days if he wins. And so I will be doing everything I can to keep him from winning. And you do not want Donald Trump as your president. Like, do not slump into that. I know it's been a few years since he was president. He's just not a good human being, leader, manager. Like there are dozens of people I know who worked in his administration who are scared shitless of him being president again because they neutered a lot of his terrible ideas. And this time he won't make the mistake of hiring responsible adults. He'll be surrounded by sycophants and yes people and some really malignant characters who will say, what's that? You want to try and deport millions of people? Sure, let's go. And then if you imagine what that looks like in real life in communities, it's disastrous.
And so for the people who say, like, up until COVID, when Trump was in power, it wasn't the worst case scenario that people warned about. The economy was doing well. What do you feel is meaningfully different in terms of his character or his position as a leader in this potential second term versus the first?
Oh yeah, there's a lot that's different. One, he's going to be older, and you don't tend to become like more restrained and with it and rational as like you enter dotage. I mentioned it. He had a lot of good people around him last time, and he churned and burned through most of them over the 4 years. They're not coming back, and so he won't have good people around him. But the big one is that he doesn't have to run for re-election anymore. I mean, so in the first term, Trump thought, okay, like I kind of need to keep it together so I can win. Like now he'll be like, like I'm back and like there's absolutely no compunction or limit to what I can do or not do. I'm just gonna go buck wild. And so those things should make us deeply concerned. Oh, by the way, I also want to say, like, this isn't speculative. I mean, he's actually said in his various speeches, it's like, I'm just going to be on a revenge tour. Like, it's just retribution time. Like, I mean, like, this isn't, sort of reading tea leaves. I mean, he's just running around saying it. There are various organizations that are game planning for a lot of this stuff. Anyway, I mean, there's one thing I want to, I haven't talked a lot about this, but this is a very, very deep one. There are organizations that are planning on trying to dismantle the administrative state under a second Trump term. And there are a lot of reasonable Americans who are kind of fed up with our bureaucracy anyway. And so they hear this and they're like, I don't know how I feel about that. There are good ways to try and, move our bureaucracy in a better direction. And there's a brilliant woman who wrote an awesome book called Recoding America, Jen Pahlka, who spent years in service. And it unpacks the ridiculous Byzantine dysfunction of the bureaucracy, but then also is like, look, here are some things we could do that might help it. And she has some dramatic thoughts around trying to quote unquote like zero-base various regulatory approaches, which is to take something and say like, hey, if we had to show up today, like what would we do? And maybe like this patchwork of laws, like it isn't the way. So Jen Pahlka is like a well-intended person. You don't want someone with terrible intention, like taking, a sledgehammer to these institutions. You're going to end up driving a lot of people out. You're not going to replace them. You're either just not going to replace them, or you're going to replace them with nobody good. And some of these things we take for granted in American life. There's a lot of waste, a lot of bureaucracy, but we're gonna miss it. Like if you take a grenade to it, like that's not the right approach. We definitely need like a real, more modern approach to the way our government is doing things, but that is not what these folks have in mind. And one of the visions I have, I'm not sure if I've shared this vision with you, Rikki. All right.
I'll have to tell you after.
Tell me, yes. So imagine in 2028 that there's an independent primary. And I'm in it, Mark Cuban's in it, Oprah's in it, The Rock, Matthew McConaughey, whoever your favorite person is who may or may not be of the two parties. And we can all vote for it on our smartphone in New York, in California, like wherever. And you can say like, I like Cuban, I like Oprah, whoever it is. On your smartphone, it gets verified via a personalized QR code that gets sent to your mailing address. You get millions of Americans actually participating in who the nominee should be. And then the legacy parties would be left saying, no, that's not real. What is real is waiting to hear what 6% of Iowans think in February. And then millions of Americans would be like, well, that makes no sense. Like, these guys seem to care what I think. They're actually like debating where I live. They're like doing interviews in interesting forums. You'd probably interview, all of the candidates. You could actually reintroduce democracy into the picture. And even if your candidate didn't emerge from the independent primary, they might endorse the winner. And then you were like, look, whatever this crew is about, I'm into, because they care what I think. They're trying to give it back to the people. This is, by the way, what I said to the No Labels folks at this point 2 years ago. I said, look, if you're going to do this, do it early and give it to the people. Make it an internet primary, because if you don't, then it's going to seem like a group of insiders came up and said, like, here are our folks. Like, you don't like these folks, here are our folks, and you're going to cap yourself at 15, 20%. If you give it to the people, by the way, I've lived a version of this, so I know this is how it would go. If you give it to the people, then you might catalyze millions of people to invest in your campaign, and then you actually can hit escape velocity. Instead of 15, 20%, you can get to the 38% or so you need to actually start winning. But the establishment has ways of trying to, like kneecap and stifle momentum and energy. Like the press being obviously the most obvious. If you're going to kick off the movement, then having a real competition and giving people real say is the most powerful way to do so. And if you think about what that would take, the tech is obviously mature. All you would need is a party with ballot access, and then some heavyweight candidates. So I think that process has a chance to really change everything, and that process, I believe, is going to unfold in America sometime in the next 4, 8, or 12 years.
And what's the advantage of doing an internet primary like that? Because I'd imagine that there would be skepticism or resistance just because it's different and it's not going to a ballot anymore. It's skepticism about, is someone going to hack it? How secure is it?
You know what percentage of Iowans participated in the caucus I was a part of in 2020?
Oh God, I have no idea.
6%. I mean, I actually think it's the reverse, where if you could vote on your phone, you'd be like, okay, these people are actually living in the 21st century. And we could invite people in, journalists, you could look at our back end and be like, look, it's like pretty buttoned up. And there are ways to make it so that these things are either completely tamper-proof, or if someone tampers, like we all know it immediately in real time. There's something called the blockchain. So by the way, if you pose this to folks, if you go to Democrats or Republicans and say, hey, internet voting, they'll be like, can't do it, insecure. And then if you give them a sheaf of white papers being like, actually, it's totally secure, and the military's already doing it, which they are, by the way, then they don't say, oh, like, let me take a look at that. Like, they actually have no desire to expand the franchise. Like, they like having a limited universe of voters. They know who it is, and then they can just like hit them in the same place. I mean, if you had an internet primary, it opens it up. By the way, if you live in New York or California, when's the last time that you had a say in who the nominees were? And by the way, a lot more awesome people would run in that primary, because right now a lot of awesome people would never run in the Democratic primary or Republican primary. They know they're going to get it stuck to them. They know if they're in the Republican primary, they're probably going to have to say a bunch of stuff they don't actually believe, or bend the knee to someone they actually do not like or respect. Like there are these massive distortions that are happening because of the party system. And so if you say, look, you can make your own case directly to the American people, and you can just get votes out there in the world, and not go to the hustings of this place and play this weird game. I think you could get awesome people who would glory in being able to actually just speak directly to American people and not have it get filtered through the parties.
I mean, I'm completely with you, and I've shared with you before that the first election that I can really remember with any degree of maturity is 2016. So I've only grown up in this context of hyper-partisanship and lesser of two evils, and everyone feels compromised, and Thanksgiving tables are being torn apart. But how do you motivate young people who, to your point, are so much more independent or skeptical, at least, of the two-party system? How do you take that energy and make sure that it doesn't become cynicism? Like, how do we get a generation of disaffected youth to actually affect change rather than just shrink away and shrug and say, oh, it's another geriatric rematch?
It's just going to depress you and piss you off, and you can sense your vote's not going to matter anyway. Even in the presidential race, if you don't live in one of those 6 states, your vote will not matter. So, paying attention seems kind of dumb. And it's very easy to become negative and cynical. What I would suggest to young people who actually want to try and turn things around is that it's not enough to be a voter. And if someone says vote, I mean, they've gamed the system, so your vote probably does not matter in most of these instances. You have to become a structural reformer. And I know even my saying that made some of you wince, and it sounds nerdy and wonky. But you have to be for nonpartisan primaries, you have to be for ranked choice voting, be for third parties if they're, frankly, in my opinion, actually trying to make fundamental change, which is what the Forward Party is designed to do, and become savvy. Don't let people bully you and being like, oh, you're a bad person because you're not paying attention to this and that. It's look, I'm being manipulated, I'm being set up, and the only thing I'm going to listen to is someone who's actually going to change the underlying incentives so these people have to listen to me, because right now they do not have to listen to me. I have a 10-minute TED Talk on this subject that if you just Google Andrew Yang TED Talk, you'll see. But that's what I'd ask of young people. It's I actually don't disagree with you. If you're look, I don't want to deal with this bullshit, be I feel your pain. And whatnot, just become savvy and say, you know what I am for though? I'm for these reforms, I'm for getting money out of politics, I'm for that stuff. And anyone who's doing those things, I will give them my attention and and energy. And then these other people who are trying to just turn me against other people and depress me, I'm going to ignore.
And so for people who are motivated by that, where can they find you and get resources on how to continue that fight?
Just go to forwardparty.com. We have chapters in all 50 states. You can go to andrewyang.com, and I'm grinding away at this all the time. You can just follow me, my newsletter. I write a weekly newsletter. And we're building the movement, and would love, love, love to have you. If actually there's one thing I would say is like we need young people in the Forward Party in the worst way. You could become a leader very, very quickly if you wanted, because we very much need your energy. The folks that get attracted to Forward have been kind of more traditional, forwardists. I mean, I don't mean to paint us with a brush or whatever, but it's like it hasn't been a ton of young people to the extent that I'd wanted to. And I won the Iowa youth straw poll in 2020. Like, I know a lot of young people liked me in the last cycle. This movement really is for you. The issue, though, is that it's not hitting like youthful buttons in the same way that some other movements are, which is like, hey, it requires like a degree of sophistication and perspective. And savvy, and also like we're not trying to make you emotionally like wrought up. We're trying to make you smart about what's really holding us back. Because right now, what you want, you're not going to get in this system. And so the question is, what is the system that will give you what you want?
Well, on that note, thank you so much for being here, Andrew. And everyone check out his platform, and his TED Talk was an excellent explanation of ranked choice voting and open primaries and how we can fix things on a democratic level. So thanks so much for being here. It's been such a pleasure.
Congrats, Rikki. Very happy for you.
Thank you.